Prologue. The utmost goal of Schizophrenia Deconstructed is to inform mental health practitioners about orthomolecular treatment for schizophrenia, drug and alcohol-related psychosis, PTSD-induced psychosis, and any other form of distressing psychosis. The mission statements of the American Psychiatric Association, NAMI, and the National Institute for Mental Health all call for the continued search and use of enlightened, humane, different, and progressive treatments for mental illness. The burden is on the field of psychiatry and psychology to expand and learn about humane treatments outside of the accepted industry of psychology paradigm. In no way, shape, or form is Schizophrenia Deconstructed meant to place any burden on my peers. It is not meant as a judgment about personal choices, nor is it a definitive statement on the complexity of humans as emotional beings, nor the brain. I respect the complexity, and I am humble to the mystery. Everyone must be empowered to make their own choices about life. I hold that value to the highest. This is just my story. Thank you. Hello, my name is Luna Tickle, and I will be your host for the show. I'm here to tell you my story. I suffered from schizophrenia for over 30 years, ever since I was 5 years old. I've been in and out of mental hospitals since I was 16 years old, and even did court-ordered time at County Mental Health. In 2012, I found out about a physician and psychiatrist from the 1950s, Dr. Abram Hoffer, and his research in treating schizophrenia with niacin. Yes, niacin, the vitamin. In 2013, I found a doctor who would treat me with megadoses of niacin. Since April of 2013, I have not suffered any paranoid delusions, hallucinations, auditory or visual of any kind. This presentation is for practitioners in the mental health field, students of psychiatry, and any medical professional that is currently prescribing psychiatric medication. I am here to ask for your help. I want to make clear that I am advocating for orthomolecular therapy for psychosis and schizophrenia to be a mainstream treatment option for long-term relief of distressing hallucinations, delusions, and psychosis. I have slipped through nearly every crack in society and the mental health system in order to be here today and to ask you to bear witness to my story. I am here to speak for those who cannot. Schizophrenia is widely misunderstood and stigmatized. I want to take you all on a journey through my life. The status quo of the industry of psychiatry is in desperate need of change. You all have the power to be a part of that change. This presentation is to give momentum to new thought, new treatments, new philosophies, expanding cultural perceptions, and most of all, to ignite inspiration. Chapter 1, ages 5 to 18. This first song is about being paranoid and schizophrenic as a child.
There's
Being a kid was terrifying. I was aware that reality did not present itself to me with the same ease as it did to others. I was testing reality even at a young age, desperately, trying to integrate and understand my surroundings. I was trapped in a psychotic world of panic delusion where fantasy blended with reality. My world was fear, danger, paranoia. Shadows haunted me. Faceless voices screamed at me. Easy to upset, I was a prime target for schoolyard torture. My world was pain, inside and out. My tantrums and paranoia did eventually land me in the psychiatrist's office. At age 11, I looked a psychiatrist dead in the eye and denied any voices outside of my head or any strange or paranoid thoughts. But this moment of dishonesty is so important to understand. I lied out of fear. Even at age 11, I may not have fully understood that I was suffering from schizophrenia, but I understood that I was different enough that if anyone knew the nightmarish world that I lived in, something very bad would happen to me. It was 1988 when I was 11 years old, before the diagnosis of autism and ADHD were invented. I was dismissed as a prepubescent girl testing boundaries. I was already deconstructing psychiatry, already aware of the danger, the societal threat, and because psychiatry is based on self-reporting, I had found the loophole. I also began to self-harm as a child as a way to manage my hallucinations and delusions. I gave myself black eyes, I smashed my face into walls and door jambs, and sliced giant wounds into my skin to let the pain and endorphins override the hell I existed in. I struggled from suicidal ideation almost daily. My first suicide attempt was when I was 16 years old. I took a combination of pills that would stop my heart. I desperately wanted escape from the voices, from the elaborate delusions. I wanted peace. I wanted quiet. At age 18, I had my first full-blown psychotic episode that could not be dismissed as a childhood tantrum. I was running wild in the streets like some kind of philosophy angel on a mission to save humanity. I was screaming bad poetry in bus stops, wandering the sidewalks to tell my glory to anyone who would listen, talking to myself to soothe the pressure of my mission. My mission was to save the world. My mission was to elevate the human race to the light, to save every child, every mind, every soul, and to unleash truth and beauty into this nightmare of a world. There were signs and codes everywhere. Every number, every letter had a feeling to it that I could calculate in order to know what to do next. The voices were a constant reminder that I would sacrifice my life in order to set free my atoms that contained the massive energy of the universe inside me and penetrate the earth. I was ready to suicide in the name of a glittering justice I can hardly explain to you now. I was found at the airport, talking to strangers, talking to myself, searching for signs, screaming at security guards. The police were called. I was taken to the mental hospital. Basically, I got caught. Chapter 2, ages 18 to 25. I got caught. I was very ill and needed 24-hour care and supervision for the next 6 months. My family cared for me the best they could. The fits of self-harm became more and more volatile and more extreme. My whole family would have to hold me down. But most of all, my family held me. I am forever grateful that they held me. I was hospitalized many times in the next few years and saw many psychiatrists. I was handed piles of pills. By age 19, I was prescribed 11 plus psych meds: Paxil, lithium, Depakote, Trazodone, clonazepam, Risperdal, Zyprexa, Seroquel, Ativan, and even Ritalin to counter all the sedation and keep my eyes open for a few hours every day. I can't really say much about this time because I don't remember very much. I was heavily dosed with every mood stabilizer and antipsychotic available. I was placed in Milwaukee County Mental Health. I was treated like an animal. I was put in restraints. I was court-ordered by law to take my medications, and I was threatened with electric shock therapy. I was put on disability and told that any ideas I could ever have as life as a normal person were over. I was diagnosed with pretty much everything. Bipolar 1, PTSD, reactive attachment disorder, borderline personality disorder, schizoaffective disorder, and I absorbed this identity of despair and dysfunction until I couldn't remember being anything else. I was poisoned more than once by the psychiatrist's prescription pad. I overdosed more than once because I felt less than human. My life became a black hole of apathy, delusion, and self-destruction. Don't call the doctors. They've heard it all before.
From the scars on my arms and the cracks in my hips and the dents in my car and the blisters on my lips that I'm not the carefulest of toes. You can tell from the glass on the floor and the strings that are breaking and I keep on breaking more. And it looks like I am shaking, but it's just the temperature. Then again, if it were any colder, I could disengage. If I were any older, I would act my age, but I don't think that you believe me. It's not the way I'm meant to be. It's just the way the operation made me. From the state of my room that they let me out too soon, and the pills that I ate came a couple days too late. I've got some issues to work through. There I go again, pretending to be you, make believing that I have a soul beneath the surface, trying to convince you it was accidentally on purpose. I am not so serious. This passion is a plagiarism. I might join your century, but only on a rare occasion. I was taken up before the labor pains and tearing down the whole world was accidental. You can tell by the red in my eyes and the bruises on my thighs and the knots in my hair and the festival of flies that I'm not right now at all. There I go again, pretending that I'll fall. Don't call it actors, they've seen it all before. They'll say just let her crash and burn. She'll learn the attention just encourages her. You can tell from the full body cast that you're saying that you have, so you did everything you could like any decent person would, but I might be catching, so don't touch. Don't believe that you're immune to gravity and stuff. Don't get me wet because the bandages will all come off. You can tell from the state at the state that the current state is critical. But it's the little things, for instance, time it takes to break it, she can make her take seriously. Excuse her for the day, it's just the way the medication makes her. I don't necessarily believe there is a cure for this, so I might join your century, but only as a death will death. I was too precarious, removed as necessary, you know. I am the golden anachronism. I am the golden anachronism.
I dedicate this song to the American Psychiatric Association, and especially to the psychiatrist who told my parents I wouldn't live past the age of 25, because I did live. Chapter 3, ages 25 to 34. I did live. I did escape the county mental health system after 3 years and took myself off most of my meds. In these next few years, I dedicated myself to self-care and living with a psychiatric disability. I practiced yoga, meditation, tai chi, taekwondo, anything to try and keep my body and my emotions in prime health. I explored spirituality, healing, and I stayed in talk therapy, learning to be grounded in my body, learning to cope with the fear and panic through deep breathing and other trauma-related coping skills kept me semi-functional, and having a sense of the world and energy outside myself saved my life. From the outside, I seemed disciplined. The reality was, I was motivated by the terror of ever going back to the county mental health system. I eventually quit drinking. I went back to school for philosophy, where I learned how to reality check using simple logic exercises. I became enamored with existential philosophy and used what I learned to help me manage reality despite my hallucinations. I used the student accessibility services for my disability to help me get through my studies. I began volunteering regularly in the community. I worked at crisis shelters for homeless youth and was working towards a career in social work. My work not only moved me, but it soothed me. To have the honor to serve was precious to me. I do not think it is coincidental that my most detrimental delusions about saving people were quieted and appeased through servitude. I went to grad school for counseling psychology to continue building on my career of choice, and I excelled. These years were the first time I felt some sort of identity and agency and connectedness in my community. I was chosen for the top counseling internships in my program, and I really thought that I was going to make it. I was going to fool them all. I was going to be a schizophrenic and have a life and have a career and stability, and I would never sit in art therapy in a mental hospital making ceramic ashtrays again. During these years, I also dug myself deeper and deeper into passing, or pretending not to be a schizophrenic. Especially as I moved into my psychology classes, the dangers became more real. I listened to the way the professors and students talked about schizophrenia. It became imperative that I go undercover. I could hardly keep up with all the lies. Sometimes I told people I was bipolar, still a stigmatized mental illness, but without the immediate reaction of violence, insanity, and danger. I changed how I spoke. I changed how I moved my hands. I changed based on the situation. I changed based on who I was talking to, and I used my appearance as a Caucasian female like a shield. I humbly acknowledge my white privilege because light needs to be shed continuously on the racism that so insidiously exists in this country. I used my whiteness to my advantage and on purpose many times. I use my privilege now to try and create change by advocating for humane treatment for all humans labeled under the umbrella of schizophrenic diagnoses. I absolutely understand that this declaration does not undo any injustice for anyone. I do not come from a place of pity or arrogance, but from a place of wanting to dismantle a very destructive system. I find it prudent to reveal just how much my mere appearance helped me to succeed so that there is no mistake about it. I have been called such things as a high-functioning schizophrenic, and I absolutely reject that ideology. Schizophrenia is a horrendous disease that is only allowed to discriminate through societal perception of race and ability. I refuse to take any credit for my achievements beyond the fact that it was easy for me to fool people directly due to my appearance and my ability to speak. An ability that is not afforded to all who suffer from this terrifying malfunction of sensory input. With the cultural barriers of racism and disability at play, true potential and achievement become impossible to measure, except as a great unknown of loss. This is my experience as a consumer of the industry of psychiatry, and I speak my truth as inclusively and respectfully as I possibly can. This is a quote by Karl Marx. Men make their own history. but they do not make it as they please. They do not make it under self-selected circumstances, but under circumstances existing already, given and transmitted from the past. The tradition of all the dead generations weighs like a nightmare on the brains of the living. Back then, I could have a full-blown intellectual conversation while hearing several moderate auditory hallucinations at one time. I trained my attention every day to not give myself away. I felt so clever. When I had psychotic episodes, I had a system for hiding. I knew when to go inpatient if I felt unsafe, and I walked this very dangerous line of hiding and living with schizophrenia for almost 10 years without the regular daily use of antipsychotics. I still battled suicidal ideation every day, and I feel eternally grateful to be here today. I had 2 to 3 benign hallucinations an hour, and no one would ever know because I had become so adept at faking. I am well-spoken and a great con artist. I lied about Social Security disability, doctor's appointments, my many and prolonged absences, how much I work, what my past is like. I lied every day to conceal the label that is underneath everything that is real about me. Looking back, all the lying, all the fear, all the hypervigilance that it took to maintain this ruse and function in 4 or 5 different identities has had more lasting damage on my health than suffering from schizophrenia itself. There is plenty of research documenting that the society, culture, and communities that people with psychiatric disabilities must exist in, the discrimination, the isolation, and the stigma of this culture has worse effects on our health than the actual illness that we are afflicted with. I may have suffered from schizophrenia, but it was the constant pressure of living a lie to survive, to protect my life, to not end up back in the psych ward that nearly broke me. I was always running from being swallowed up by the system. People with psychiatric disabilities are not only an afterthought. We are monsters. We are lost. We are feared reflections of, what if that were me? We are pushed away by dangerous means to ease that fear. We don't get married. We don't go to universities. We don't have families. We don't have sex. We don't have careers, and we don't get better. Those of us who can try desperately to deny and fake our way into the real world because we know the depths of isolation and loneliness. We live in worlds of shame and fear, trying to keep up with the lies. I wanted more than what was promised to me as recovery, aka being compliant with meds or electric shock therapy. I am still healing from what I thought was so clever. I am still healing from what is actually trauma, discrimination, and shame. I am still healing from what this culture and society has taught me, that I am less than human. For all my subterfuge and so-called discipline, there were still times that I ended up in the psych ward for my own safety, so I wouldn't get lost in the missions and suicide. In 2011, a fellow classmate in my master's program worked as a receptionist in one of the hospitals that I ended up in. I expressed my concerns to the hospital psychiatrist about being revealed because no one in my grad program knew that I was schizophrenic. He told me I was paranoid and raised my antipsychotic. He also kindly offered me electric shock therapy, noting that I would have to admit by now I wasn't getting any better. Not long after I was released, I was indeed outed to my grad program during a class that I shared with said classmate in front of the entire class and the professor. I did file a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights, and it was found that my federal privacy rights had been violated. The hospital was sanctioned and the student was fired from her position. But despite this justice, the damage was done. I admitted to hallucinating to my supervisors at school under the pressure and fear of who knew what, who else the classmate might have told. I was terrified, and I didn't know what else to do but be transparent. I felt it was the ethical thing to do, especially now that I was a therapist in training with clients. I was not out about being schizophrenic at any of my other social work jobs in the community, and I didn't know what would happen. My answer was swift. You aren't paranoid if they're really after you. Cancel any future appointments with your clients. Turn in your keys. Slowly and calmly leave the building. Do not return until you stop hallucinating. There was no incident. I didn't freak out on a client or a coworker or a student, professor, or anyone, ever. My reviews of my internship up until this point were glowing. There was no incident. In my 10-year career of social work and serving humans, there had never been an incident. 10 years of service and dedication meant nothing. As soon as the words schizophrenic and hallucination were spoken, it's textbook discrimination. Straight from those textbooks I had been studying so vigilantly since the beginning of my graduate career. I was effectively barred from completing my internship, and thusly I could not graduate from my master's program. I may not have been able to defend myself then, but I can now. People who hallucinate can't turn it off. Medication can't turn it off. There is no magic hallucination switch. You learn to live with your beautiful self and your beautiful senses. You see the spark of existence in all things living and non. You learn to care for your pain so it does not overtake you. You do not harm others. You are not dangerous. You are gentle, and your empathy connects with all that is hurtful in the world. I would tell myself this to survive. I would tell myself this so I would not suicide. So I would keep going. Being barred from completing my master's program felt like my world being destroyed. Despite 20 years of solid research that clearly proves schizophrenics are most at risk for harming themselves and that aggression is a trait, not a symptom of psychosis, the knee-jerk reaction of violence and implicit fear still lives on strong. School was my only chance to succeed and have a self-sustaining life. It was gone. I deeply contemplated suicide. My hallucinations and overall health worsened exponentially. I soothed myself by obsessively researching and reading anything and everything I could get my hands on about mental illness, the history of psychiatry, the rise of pharmaceuticals, the societal ramifications of living with psychiatric disability in the USA, the science of the brain, the birth of diagnosis, and the perceptions of mental illness around the world. I was looking for another loophole. I had also been exposed to the ignorant beliefs of some of the professionals who are supposed to be helping people like me. You would be surprised what people say when they don't know who's listening. After being barred from graduating, I began to reinvent my own views. I would not wither in shame and danger that I had just been through. I was alive on this planet. I existed in this culture, and I had a place somewhere, if I could only find it outside of a psych ward. I began to build myself again from the ground up, from nothing to nothing, but I had a new perspective. I was building a whole new identity for myself, an identity of inclusion, of celebration of variation within a species, adaptation as survival, and the birth of me, Luna Tickle, the most beautiful way for me to express who I really am, despite what people think they see. I was so tired of hiding. I desperately needed to feel free. when I think of the complete failure a counseling psychology program that has won awards for multicultural sensitivity in dealing with a person who is of the very group that they claim to be training people to help, all I can say is this.
I ain't no psychiatrist, I ain't no doctor with degrees, but it don't take too much time to see what you're doing to me. You better think about what you're trying to do to me, yeah. Think, let your mind go, let yourself be free. Oh, freedom, 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 oh, freedom, yeah, freedom, now
So let's think about it. In deconstructing the industry of psychiatry, I have found there is really no need to dispute any claims that the mainstream industry of psychiatry has ever made in the USA. The science falls on its own face, by its own words. Nothing I propose in this presentation is at odds with any of the current goals of the present-day accepted paradigm of psychology and psychiatry. The National Association for Mental Illness, or NAMI, defines mental illness as an organic brain disease of which there is no known cause. If there is no known cause, then how can we accept the affirmation that mental illness is an organic brain disease? The definition defeats itself and allows for a broader scope of thought and exploration in the realm of emotional distress, behavior, and root causes of disease. In 2013, Thomas R. Insel, MD, former director of the National Institute of Mental Health, which had thrown its weight previously and all of its funding behind the earlier editions of the manual, the DSM, the Bible of Diagnosing, declared that they would be reorienting its research away from diagnostic categories, citing the DSM's weakness is its lack of validity, as well as stating, unlike our definitions of ischemic heart disease, lymphoma, or AIDS, the DSM diagnoses are based on a consensus about clusters of clinical symptoms that are subjective and not any objective laboratory measure. Even with the National Institute of Mental Health's shrewd dismissal of diagnosis in 2013, the psychiatric community still eagerly embraces faulty, invalid science. It would also seem that the statements of the industry of psychiatry do not have a clear message about schizophrenia or mental illness and are at odds with themselves. The opportunity is ripe for change, questions, research, and new treatments. The lack of scientific validity has created a doorway. We don't have to fight the status quo. We just have to step through the doors that have been left wide open. There is no such thing as normal. It is an illusion that keeps stigma, stereotypes, and discrimination accessible and is easily wielded from subjective decision. The ignorance of ourselves is violent. Normal is violence. The brain as an organ is not well understood by science in any definitive way. Much like theories of the universe and physics, the functioning of the brain has many coherent guesses, but many more mysteries. The lack of respect in the medical community for the mystery of the brain causes harm to anyone suffering from existence. So, if you exist, this all applies to you. There are dangerous ramifications of attempting to apply the methods of science to things that are not measurable, such as consciousness. Although very useful, history will remind us that science is only the best guess we have at the time. When science forgets its limits, the validity of its assertions fall prey to manipulation, misuse, and maltreatment. Chapter 4, ages 35 to present. Psychiatry has most certainly forgotten its limits. No one has ever looked inside my brain or done any sort of blood test or physical test or scientific test and said, "Yup, that's the schizophrenia in there." Yet I have been enthusiastically offered electric shock therapy and dangerous medications with dangerous side effects over and over and over again. Always with the disclaimer that the effectiveness is unknown and trading life for relief is the cost. It is irresponsible to treat symptoms in any sort of dysfunction when the root cause is not known. Yet the most dangerous part of this story is that the industry of psychiatry, in treating its patients, acts as though they have facts. They assume to know and give it a whirl. The invention of the lobotomy was given the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1949. I do believe that most all doctors and medical professionals are doing their best to help. The problem now is the system they must work within and the accepted views of mental health in the USA. We have to start asking the questions instead of being told guesses. The ignorance we have been fed is our only enemy. We must demand true healing from the medical and psychiatric communities. An overhaul of how emotional distress is viewed and treated does not happen overnight, but it can happen. I am in no way saying that traditional medication has no use. It's especially useful in short-term crisis situations. I am here to inject doubt into what you think you know about mental illness and mental health. I'm here to ignite ideas. I am here to inspire you to educate yourself on different methods, different philosophies, and different theories. There is a lot of research and books out there about why the industry of psychiatry isn't working and hasn't had any major breakthroughs in treatment since the 1970s. Everything I am presenting to you today was inspired by my own thirst for knowledge. The book, Orthomolecular Treatment of Schizophrenia by Dr. Abraham Hoffer, is only 55 pages long. We need you to help us change how we are treated. We need you to truly help us heal and to widen the catalyst of what healing means and to give us true options for recovery. Even with all these ideas and wigs and excitement, I was still under-medicated and getting sicker and sicker, and the control that I prided myself on in managing my hallucinations began to fail me. My options for treatment were becoming grim. I did have to admit by now that I was not getting better. I had recently watched a documentary called Feed Your Head about Dr. Hoffer. Dr. Hoffer researched niacin therapy for schizophrenia and alcoholism starting in the 1950s. His treatment is based on the theory that schizophrenia, or delirium tremens, or psychosis sometimes seen in chronic cocaine users, is caused by the lack of the ability to metabolize adrenaline, which leads to a lack of niacin in the brain. Niacin is essential in detoxing the brain of lysergic acid, or LSD. And as the lysergic acid builds up in the brain, a malfunction of the senses begins in the form of hallucinations, delusions, and paranoid behavior. Dr. Hoffer's work was discredited with the onset of pharmaceuticals such as Haldol and Thorazine. This was not a coincidence. I listened to the other psychiatrists who spoke in the documentary of that time who witnessed the onset of the pharmaceutical shift in the treatment of emotional distress. They spoke out about medication being the new straitjacket, only with more devastating side effects to the entire body. I did not have much hope in finding a doctor that would explore niacin treatment with me. That's when I found Shalom Healing. I fully expected to be turned away by Dr. Fox, but Dr. Fox listened. Dr. Fox ran some preliminary blood work before even pulling out a prescription pad. Imagine that. A doctor looking at my body, which my brain is a part of, before doling out dangerous medication. It was a first. It was an only in my entire life. And it gave me hope that this doctor was serious and believed in what he was doing. By the 3rd month of niacin treatment, I was completely hallucination-free. That was in 2013, and my senses are still functioning fabulously. I remember the first time I heard the world without any interference. It was so loud. Even sitting in silence was fascinatingly loud to me. After 30 years of constant auditory and visual hallucinations, I think what surprised me the most is that I was much more impaired than I ever imagined. To be able to see people's faces clearly, with no fear or danger. I could walk down the street without the hiss of commanding voices coming from every street sewer. To be able to see a red fire hydrant next to a red car and then realize the absence of any sort of referential delusion. To experience depth perception. To see a leaf on a tree was to rejoice in the simplicity of a world made up of sharp, focused lines. It's hard for me to describe what it was like for me to no longer suffer from schizophrenia. Every last person suffers from existence. Everyone has a spectrum of emotional health that must be wrangled with as the peaks and valleys of life happen. People all exist in a perspective of reality that they alone experience and interpret. Everyone is abnormal, and variation in a species equals evolution. Variation ought to be exalted, welcomed, and embraced if humans as a species are to evolve. Every person exists on a continuum of variation, and to find fault and shame in our differences is to deny ourselves as a species evolution. We are not monsters. We are beautiful mirrors of a traumatized society. We are the future. After going through the niacin detox, after rejoicing in my new senses, a deep sadness set into my being. I was riding the city bus, and there was a man talking to himself sitting across from me. In this moment, my world went black. The guilt that washed over me was thick. Why me? Why not this man? Why not everyone who has suffered as I have? Why does my victory feel like a horrific failure as I sit here across from one of my own? Chapter 5, Trauma. The darkness that washed over me melted into experiencing severe symptoms of complex PTSD. I was evaluated by PTSD specialists that worked with the VA, and I clocked in around what is commonly seen in combat veterans who have returned home from war. I did experience prolonged and severe in utero as well as early childhood trauma. When talking about trauma, it is important that we not traumatize each other. I'd like to ask that we all be in forgiveness and compassion. I will not tell you what happened to me, but I will take this opportunity to inhale calmness and safety. One way to view the cluster of symptoms that we call schizophrenia is through the lens of coping with trauma. Post-traumatic stress kicks the adrenal glands into hyperactive mode, wreaking havoc on many systems of the body. Prolonged post-traumatic stress changed my entire ability to perceive the world with my senses. Without my hallucinations, I had no idea who I was. Every single motivation for my former behaviors disappeared with my delusions. I was confronted for the first time with the reality of my life. Although I had been in therapy for my history for 10 plus years, schizophrenia seemed to be a closed loop of extremely effective, if not maladaptive, coping. The children I saved in my delusions were not me. I had control. I had clues. I had release for the pressure of that life and death feeling. I had power. Suddenly, that power was gone, and that child was me. The world was void of secret, mystical patterns that would unlock my suffering. I have never wished for my hallucinations back except in dealing with the severe symptoms of PTSD. Flashbacks, nightmares, hypervigilance, sleep disturbances, harming myself in my sleep, feelings of detachment, feelings of not being human, emptiness, powerlessness, mood swings, disassociation, and blankness. There were no more missions, just me, and I had no idea who that was. As with most medicine that truly heals, niacin is not a quick fix. The underlying trauma must be dealt with the intimate understanding of how vigilantly the brain has worked to protect the consciousness from that trauma. Self-disclosure of history of abuse does not include in utero or early childhood memories. We also live in a traumatic, acidic world. Don't underestimate the circumstances the consciousness may not have access to, and respect that there is reasons for that protection. The reconstructive period of niacin treatment is just as vital as stopping the hallucinations and delusions. I had to learn how to live as a whole new person with different reasons for simply being. My identity needed to be reconstructed. It has been a painful and delicate time, ultimately beautiful. Living and healing never stops, but I am awestruck now to live inside myself and to be here with you. My brothers and sisters deserve the same peace.
yeah. I stare at my reflection in the mirror. Why am I doing this to myself? Losing my mind on a tiny error. I nearly left the real me on the shelf. No, 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 no. Don't lose your eye in the blur of the stars. Seeing is deceiving, dreaming is believing. It's okay not to be okay. Sometimes it's hard to follow your heart. There's something you're losing, everybody's bruising. Just be true to who you are. Love, no, 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 no. Brushing my hair, do I look perfect? I forgot what to do to fit the mold, yeah. The more I try, the less it's working. Hey, yeah. 'Cause everything inside me screams no, 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 no. Don't lose who you are in the blur of the stars. Seeing is deceiving, dreaming is believing. It's okay not to be okay. Sometimes it's hard to follow your heart. But tears don't mean you're losing, everybody's bruising. There's nothing wrong with who you are. Yes, no egos, fake shows like whoa, just go and leave me alone. Real talk, real life, good love, good night, with a smile. That's my yeah. That's my home. No.
Epilogue. No matter how good I was at faking or passing, or even if I was given the gift of language so that I could fool all the normies, I know who I am. I am a schizophrenic, and I am no different from that man on the bus, or the woman screaming in the streets, or the homeless person, or the person receiving electric shock therapy because they are out of options, or Adam Trammell, who is tased over 16 times in his shower, given ketamine, and murdered by the police on a wellness check in the year of 2018. I am a schizophrenic, and no matter how well my brain works now, I claim this label with liberation, because it shouldn't have been so hard for me to get this freedom. And until this freedom and other freedoms are bestowed widely and without barriers, I will proudly be schizophrenic. It's a challenge before the whole human race that I'm going to lose.
I've paid my dues, time after time. I've done my sentence, but committed no crime. And bad mistakes, I've made a few. I've had my share of bad kicks in my face, but I've come through. I need to go on, on. We are the champions, my friends, and we'll keep on fighting till the end. We are the champions. We fortune and everything that goes with it. I thank you all, but it's been no bed of roses, no pleasure cruise. I consider it a challenge before the whole human race, and I ain't gonna lose. And I need to go. We are the champions, my friends, and we'll keep on fighting till the end. We are the champions. We are the champions. No time for losers, 'cause we are the champions of the world, the champions, my friends. And we'll keep on fighting till the end. We are the champions.
The biggest reason I got all dressed up today to speak and dance around for you is because I am asking for your help and the help of the psychiatric community to carry on this legacy. I am a steward of Dr. Hoffer's relentless work. On his deathbed, his last wish was that somehow his work continue to be a humane option for people who suffer from distressful psychosis. I am proof that changes must begin and the suffering must be alleviated for the betterment of humanity. The lost potential, the lost mind, the sense of being lost in your own senses. This is not a miracle story. My story is a story of blindness, ignorance, failure, and dysfunction in the entire industry of psychiatry. You are the gatekeepers. You are our protectors. Your chosen field speaks to your honor. Use your passion, your purity of heart to help us all start treating emotional distress in new, educated, and healing ways. Thank you for hearing my story. My name is Sarah. Variation equals evolution.
Dear God, I'm writing this letter to you, 'cause I'm coming unglued. Can you help me? I'm sitting here simply trying to figure out what my life's all about. Can you show me? I never wanted to be the person you see. Can you tell me who I am? I always wanted to die, but you kept me